the strength of God in human weakness. A meditation on 2 Corinthians 12:10, the human condition and the power born from dependence. There is a statement in Scripture that confronts everything the modern world believes about power, success, and fulfillment. The Apostle Paul writes, "When I am weak, then I am strong." This sentence is not poetic by accident. It is provocative. It does not comfort superficially, it unsettles. We live in a culture that glorifies autonomy, performance, efficiency, and self-sufficiency. From an early age, we are taught that value is tied to competence, that dignity is linked to strength, and that failure must be hidden. Weakness, in the eyes of the world, is something to be corrected, overcome, or concealed. But the gospel moves in the opposite direction. One weakness as a condition, not a defect. The Bible never presents the human being as naturally strong. On the contrary, it begins by affirming our radical dependence. We were not created for absolute autonomy, but for relationship, not to be the source but the receiver. Weakness does not enter the story only with sin. It is part of the very condition of being a creature. The human error was not being weak. It was wanting to be sufficient in oneself. This insight is echoed in ancient philosophy. Classical thinkers already perceived that a person who ignores his limits becomes dangerous to himself. True wisdom, they said, begins when one recognizes what cannot be controlled. Scripture goes further. It declares that this recognition is precisely where God acts. Paul does not say, "Despite my weakness, God uses me." He says, "In my weakness, God reveals His power." This changes everything. 2. The thorn, the silence, and God's pedagogy. Paul speaks of a thorn in the flesh. Something that limited him, humbled him, exposed him. He prayed, he pleaded, he asked for relief, and God did not remove it. Instead, God responded with revelation. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Here lies one of the hardest truths of spiritual life. God does not always remove what He uses to shape us. In human logic, love eliminates suffering. In divine logic, love redeems suffering. God is not only interested in making us comfortable, but in making us whole. And spiritual wholeness is not born from the absence of pain, but from the presence of meaning. 3. Strength that produces pride, weakness that produces character. There is a profound reason why God often avoids using our natural strength as the primary instrument of His work. Human strength tends toward self-glorification. Human weakness tends toward dependence. When we rely too much on our abilities, prayer becomes optional, humility dissolves, and God becomes an accessory rather than the center. But when we are weak, tired, limited, anxious, threatened, wounded, there are no masks left to wear. We are forced to choose. Either we depend on God or we collapse. And it is at this point that character is forged. It is no coincidence that Scripture repeatedly declares that God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humility is not self-contempt. It is clarity about who we are and who God is. 4. Paul, the embodied paradox. Paul was not impressive by human standards. He himself acknowledges this. His presence was weak, his speech unimpressive, his life marked by persecution, rejection, suffering, and loss. And yet, God entrusted him with one of the greatest works in the history of the Christian faith. This reveals something essential. God does not look for perfect instruments, but for available hearts. What Paul could not accomplish through charisma or personal strength, God accomplished through spiritual power. His letters carry not the shine of empty rhetoric, but the weight of truth lived through suffering. There is a difference between speaking about God and having been sustained by Him. Paul writes as one who was broken and raised. 5. The modern illusion of permanent strength. Today, we are surrounded by motivational narratives that promise control, constant victory, an endless self-overcoming. But reality stubbornly contradicts these illusions. The body grows weak. The mind grows weary. Loss arrives. Anxiety appears. Loneliness settles in. Scripture does not call this spiritual failure. It calls it life. The question is not whether we will be weak, but where we will seek strength when weakness comes. Paul does not deny pain. He does not spiritualize suffering in a shallow way. He simply recognizes that when everything else fails, God remains. 6. When weakness becomes a place of encounter. There is a quiet truth few want to hear. Our deepest encounters with God rarely occur in seasons of victory. They happen in the valleys, in exhaustion, in short prayers, in heavy silence, in faith that does not feel but chooses to trust. It is there that we discover God is not merely a concept, He is presence. When we cannot move forward by our own strength, we are carried. When we do not understand, we are kept. When we see no way out, we are guided. Pain may remain, but despair does not rule. 7. Strength that does not come from us. God's strength is not an addition to our self-sufficiency. It is a replacement. Paul does not say that God amplifies his strength. He says that God becomes his strength. This is the difference between moralistic religion and living faith. One tries to make us strong for God. The other teaches us to depend on God because we are weak. 8. A new way of living. When this truth takes root, life changes. Anxiety loses some of its power. Failure no longer has the final word. Comparison fades. Urgency slows. Prayer deepens. Not because we become invincible, but because we understand that we are not alone. Weakness ceases to be an enemy and becomes a teacher. It teaches us limits. It leads us to grace.